Hello, and welcome to SPARC Expert Chats. I'm Rachel Marks, the Rezo SPARC Network Executive Director. I'm a middle-aged white woman with chin-length, faded, used to be purple hair, now mostly silvery. I'm wearing purple cat's eye glasses with sparkles in the corner and a dark pink top. My pronouns are she and her, and my sign name is this. SPARC is a provincial network, and we would like to acknowledge the traditional Indigenous land on which we are so fortunate to create and partake in the arts. Our organization is situated in Ontario, which is covered by 46 treaties and other agreements, such as land purchases by the Crown, signed between 1781 and 1930, as well as many, many unceded and disputed territories. What we now call Ontario is home to many Indigenous nations, First Nations peoples, the Métis and Inuit people, who have been the traditional caretakers of this land for many generations and decades and hundreds of years, and who continue to live, work, and thrive here today. Tonight, we've invited Susie Burpee and Margaret Evans from Balancing Act Canada to chat about Balancing Act, how it started, what their goals are, what the plans for the future of Balancing Act are, and how it may fit into a rural and remote construct. Before we begin, let's get to know our guests. Susie is the artistic producer at Balancing Act. Her background is in contemporary dance with a healthy dose of clown training. It was during her MA studies in theater and performance at the University of Toronto that she found her way into art and advocacy. With two small kids at home and an early pandemic underway, she began to write about the intersection of mothering and dance. This research has led to action through the Balancing Act initiative, and she is honored to be doing this work alongside the many artists and companies who are centralizing care in practice and in policy. Welcome, Susie.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks so much for having us. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm Susie Burpee, and my pronouns are she, her, and I am a white middle-aged woman with blondish hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a red plaid shirt and a red scarf, the colors of Balancing Act, and I'm here in my home in Takaranto, Toronto, which is also where Balancing Act and the Theatre Direct offices are located on the territories of the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Very, very happy to be here. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. I'm really excited to talk about Balancing Act and especially in a rural construct, but let's introduce Margaret. Margaret is the producer at Balancing Act. She is a Dora-nominated actor and producer and mama to two inspiring and hilarious young souls. Margaret was an artistic associate at Harbourfront Centre from 2008 to 2014, working on projects such as Harbour Kids, Hatch, and World Stage. She joined Crow's Theatre as associate producer in 2015 as part of the producing team for many productions, partnerships, and community events, including the development of Crow Theatre's first programming and education series for children and families. A graduate of the University of King's College in Halifax and the Actors Studio Drama School in New York, Margaret is also the managing producer of the Festival of Live Digital Art, FOLDA, which is actually close to me, Margaret, in Kingston, correct?
That is correct. Thanks so much, Rachel. I'll have to get you out to the festival in June for sure. Thanks so much for having me here tonight with Susie. My name is Margaret. My pronouns are she, her. I hesitate to say it, but I am also a middle-aged woman with brown chin-length hair, wearing glasses. I'm currently wearing a blue and white striped top, and I'm coming to you from my home in Toronto as well. So thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm joining from outside of Kingston, from Leeds and Grenville County, the traditional lands of the Algonquin, the Haudenosaunee, and it's a disputed territory covered under one of the gunshot treaties, a Crawford Treaty of 1791. So very privileged to be here and joining with you today. So Before we get started, I've already said I'm so excited about tonight's chat. I came to your conference of care in Toronto in December and was very inspired and moved by everything that was being discussed. So thank you very much. We're going to be talking about care and caregivers in the arts specifically, and Balancing Act Canada and the impact it's having on the performing arts processes and support systems across the country. So we have some questions, but before we get to the questions, I know you've prepared a short slideshow, so I will hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, it's always exciting to do these chats because we're just interested in learning and engaging with different communities. So it's particularly exciting for us to connect with the SPARC network through this chat and always learning. So we're open at any time to questions and also, happy to continue the conversation after this. But I'll dive in. I'll share my screen here and just take you through a little bit of Balancing Act history, how we formed, a little bit about what we're up to, and Margaret and I will sort of go back and forth with this.
Great. Before you start, sorry, I forgot to mention that I am looking at my phone to keep track of the Facebook page. So if anybody is joining us on Facebook with questions at any time, drop them into the comment and I will share them here. So sorry to interrupt. I just had forgot to mention that. Thank you.
That's great. And just to say right off the bat that Balancing Act is an initiative of Theatre Direct. Theatre Direct is a theatre for young audiences company based here in Toronto. And the artistic director of Theatre Direct is Lisa Marie de Liberto, and she is the founder of Balancing Act. She founded it in 2019 officially, but after some work in the community and within the sector, having conversations with other parents and caregivers, finding out if indeed the barriers and challenges that she was facing as a young mother were being experienced by other folks. And we'll talk a little bit more about those statistics and learnings, I guess, but out of all of that groundwork that Lisa Marie did with various artists and arts workers, grew this national initiative. And its aim is to support greater equality and access and inclusion for caregivers working in the performing arts. And we're working at both an individual level, but also an organizational and systemic level. So really looking to affect change in the way we work and the way we're caring for each other in the workplaces of the performing arts. So it takes a team. Lisa Marie is still with us as founder and executive director. I'm on as artistic producer. Margaret here in the room is also producer, and we work with Saba Akhtar as associate producer. We also have an amazing steering committee made up of artists and arts workers from across the country who are guiding and advising on our practices and our plans. And yeah, it's really worth a look at these wonderful folks. If you can find your way to the Balancing Act website, it shows our big team that's behind the network. So one thing we always like to say off the bat is this, look at this word caregiver, because although Balancing Act grew out of the needs of parents, it expanded very quickly to consider those with caring responsibilities and looking at that from many different angles. And we're continuing to expand our notion of care. Currently, we are defining caregiver as individuals who care for children, aging adults, those in need of personal or primary care, and anyone who self-identifies as a caregiver. And through our work in the last couple of years, we are acknowledging that this care work can include blood, adopted, chosen family, caring for colleagues, and also caring for others out of duty. There's a lot of talk about care work and the care economy currently, not only in our sector, but in other sectors. And so terms like care and also the use of the phrase, those with caring responsibilities, is really coming forward. And at the end of the day, we're responding to the fact that care needs are not a one size fits all, that as individuals, we have different approaches to caregiving and different needs. And so, as I said earlier, we're looking to learn more about what folks need and how we can channel that into our performing arts work. some of the work that I referred to earlier that Lisa Marie did was around a research study partnering with occupational sciences and occupational therapy at the University of Toronto. And it was a survey that went out to artists and arts workers and showed that, over 70% of respondents had turned down work because of caregiving responsibilities. And then this statistic also about not being engaged or asked about their needs by an employer. And this comment below that talks about being pushed aside or not taken seriously or as devoted to my work is something we're hearing a lot. Folks who have caregiving responsibilities of any kind are often seen as perhaps less professional, less able to bring their full selves to the workplace. And I guess what we're saying is that, it's the fully human self that is valuable coming to the workplace, and that's all parts of us. And that the work we do as caregivers actually enhances the work that we do as artists. There's also recent reports and recommendations. So the 2020 National Arts and Culture Impact Survey showed that 25 to 30% of the respondents identified as primary caregivers. And it breaks down the Ontario artists there. So those were statistics that we hadn't seen before. We didn't have a caregiver stat until the pandemic. And of course, the pandemic's propelled a lot of this work forward, which has we've just jumped on that bandwagon, really. No one wanting to go back to work the same way, and folks looking at responsibilities in the home differently. Also earlier, there was the Gender Parity in Canadian Artistic and Cultural Organizations report. That this was Canadian Heritage report that highlighted the impact of maternity and the value in considering it within our arts and culture. And also best practice recommendations that came out of Michelle MacArthur's Equity in Canadian Theatre report, looking at flexible work environments and accommodating different needs and naming parents and elder care providers there. So all this work we're leaning on, as well as the work of caregivers in the sector before us who have really worked at, to uplift their roles, but also have borne a lot of challenges along the way. And so that's what we're looking to work at. And we do this in a few different ways. So we spoke about responding to individual needs and also needs at an organizational level. So I'll pass to Margaret to explain a little bit about what we're doing for individual artists, sort of like direct services to artists.
Thanks, Susie. Yeah, so this great slide here that you see is a wonderful collage of some incredible artist caregivers in our community who have joined us for our monthly affinity groups and workshops. Our affinity groups are held on the third Monday of every month. And it's sort of grown and evolved into a place where we highlight artist caregivers to talk about not only their practice, but a little bit of their own balancing act. And it's been a great window into how all of these artists their practices are informed by their roles as caregivers, how their practice has evolved. And it also has often led to incredible conversations amongst attendees about different challenges, whether they be practical, personal, artistic. It's really broadened the community and allowed for individuals to come in and sort of, feel a likeness to other artists who are, experiencing the same challenges. So Rebecca Singh, who also happens to be one of our partners for a program we call Level Up, which we'll get to in a little bit. Ella Cooper, Kate Campbell-McHugh, Jess Dobkin, who I think had one of the best quotes from our affinity groups this year, where she referred to that work that we're all doing as caregivers in many different forms as the invisible production that we're all running behind the scenes, in addition to whatever in-person production. I can see you nodding, Rachel. Chelsea Haberlin, who is the artistic director of New World Theatre out in Vancouver, Nima Beckerstedt, Nina Jayarajan, and Kara Spooner. So yeah, just some elements of what we do to reach out to individuals in our community. Should we move on
Thanks,
to the next
Maggie.
slide? Yeah. So I mentioned level up. Thank goodness it was the next slide, right? Otherwise I would have messed that up. Our Level Up initiative is a huge 3-year initiative that we were very fortunate to get funding for. It was announced in the summer of 2021 to get some funding from the Women and Gender Equality Canada department. And it is a 3-year initiative where we are working with partner organizations across the country, live performing organizations, as well as collectives and project-based initiatives to explore piloting different policies and practices to support parents and caregivers in the performing arts. And we have different case studies for each individual collective or company. They work with us for 1 season at a time, exploring different strategies. And we're collecting all of this information in order to share it with the community in the spring, summer of 2024. Yeah, so just to give a little bit more information about Level Up, the partners are able to join for 1 season. Balancing Act provides every company with a small honorarium, some financial support, which can either go towards the pilot or towards the the administration of the pilot. We have bi-monthly strategy group meetings, which have been a wonderful gift in terms of building this community and conversation across the country of what it takes within a company or collective to do this sort of work. What are the different stakeholders involved? We offer one-on-one consultation when it is necessary. For example, we've worked with a human resources lawyer for more knowledge around that department. We've worked with the incredible Jean Lesage of Lesage Arts Management, and different consultants along the way as pain points come up as we explore these different pilots. And each partner and company is developing a series of templates and resources, which again, as I mentioned, we hope to share with the sector next year once we've completed this 3-year operation initiative. It's a beast, but it's been incredible. And we're halfway through now, just about to wrap up with our 2nd season of partners. We worked with 16 companies last year. We're currently working with 26, hoping to have even more in our 3rd and final year. And it really runs the gamut in terms of size and scope of each partner location. We've really reached companies from coast to coast, including the Yukon. We've had some Francophone companies. And it's been an incredible opportunity to get to know amazing members of our community, but also learn a little bit about the different caregiving needs across the country and different communities. What are the different conversations taking place, and what can we learn from each other as we try to do this work? And the photos that you see here are of one photo from the top is from a production of Is God Is that was presented by Obsidian Theatre last year, and Obsidian was one of our strategy partners in our 1st year. And this year we worked with Two Birds Theatre in partnership with Common Boots for their production earlier on this year. And you see Natasha Greenblatt and her mother, Kate Lushington, there on the bottom. So these are the different strategy areas that we've been working on. In our 1st year, we worked on care solutions, and this can encompass many different things, but is also, it's kind of, for the most part, been focused on like physical supports and childcare supports. What can be done on site in a rehearsal, in a workplace, during production to help anyone who has any care needs. Pathways to Agreement has been a fascinating partnership amongst companies to learn about how we can codify some of this work. How can we put it into policy? How can we put it into writing? Where does it enter into conversation when it comes to recruitment or hiring of staff or artists, contracting, etc.? Flexible working models. I mean, this has explored everything from different rehearsal strategies to 4-day work weeks. A lot of talk right now, obviously coming out of the pandemic, of remote work and what does that mean, etc. The Compassion Fund has been a very interesting strategy to explore in terms of the idea of having a budget line assigned to either, a workshop, a production, or perhaps a whole season of a fund that can be accessed by artists or arts workers for a variety of needs. And then this year we introduced a focus called Models for Presenters, because we found, coming out of our work with Harborfront Center, actually in our first year, that some of those venues that are, and companies that are focused a lot on presenting have very unique needs as they welcome people in for short periods of time. So that's another interesting strategy area that we're exploring this year. So we have different amounts of companies in each strategy. It's changed for every year. This is a collection of logos of some of our partners from the first 2 years. So as you can see, it runs the gamut between quote unquote collective, whom we supported last year for a workshop of their new piece, all the way to Stratford that we're working with this year with their Compassion Fund. In Stratford, for example, used a small sort of taste test of a very specific project to explore the Compassion Fund. Oakville Center for the Performing Arts is exploring the strategy as a model for presenters. Roseneath Theatre worked with us for flexible working models, as is Presentation House Theatre this year. So we've had an incredible array of partners across the country, and it's been a huge pleasure to work with everyone and explore this work. It's a one big experiment.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump on that, Margaret, and say it really is about learning and kind of gathering the learnings from these companies, which we will eventually be able to share with the sector, which is really exciting. So at the end of year one, our partners developed how-to guides or policy templates that underpin the work of the current year two partners. The same will happen for year three. And then the goal is that these resource guides, these templates then get shared with the broader sector so that they can be iterated and really be, useful as a pathway to change. And it's been incredible. The work of the partners, they've dug deep, a lot of them, especially the ones doing the policy work, and they've encountered some really interesting pain points, as Margaret has pointed out or has named, and then found ways to work with them and to find solutions. And the solutions have been surprising. And it's just great to think that, we've got one more year of this and we'll end up with hopefully 70 partners by the end of these 3 years. So yeah, it's a joy for sure. And we also are very grateful to have funding and partners like Professional Association of Canadian Theatres and TAPA, who help with our outreach and really getting the word out across the land. And also the TAC, the Canada Council for the Arts and Women and Gender Equality have funded the program.
Wow, that's amazing. On your last slide, I actually, I know a couple of the companies, but one is rural. So that's great. Femme de Feu are located in Welland, which is, it's less rural than some of our rural folks, but they've been a partner to us and did a community consultation or attended one of our community consultations last year. And just so great. You're already reaching out to our folks, which is amazing. Just really quickly, we are joined by Chris Lind, but she is having some tech difficulties and I don't think she can hear us. But hi, Chris, if you can hear us. I'm gonna message her in a minute and see if she can hear. But I have some questions. So I hope that's okay. The presentation was great and things were flashing in my head. And I have to say, first off, one of the things that I often say is like, and it seems to go with what you're saying and with the slow touring movement and with the re-indigenizing of spaces and relaxed performance, like we need to relax the processes as well. We need to stop creating art as if we're working at a factory. Well, we need to actually stop working at factories the way we work at factories, right? Like we need to bring in that human aspect again. And by honoring caregivers, that's such a a great step towards creating those relaxed spaces and those opportunities to breathe and create more fulsome, right? So congratulations, first off. I know that some companies are, instead of rehearsing like a 10 out of 12-hour day and a 6 out of 7-day week, are trying to switch to sort of like a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And I this was not, it's just popped up from listening. So do you have, like, I know that's initiative started by you. So, I mean, do you have a lot of companies who are changing their creation schedules?
Yeah, this is exciting to answer because we can say yes. I'll start, but Maggie, I'll pass over to you because you've got more details on this. But for instance, we just had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with Downstage Theatre. They had piloted an alternative schedule for their production of the F Word in February, and it was a 5-day work week, and it was they added actually a week of tech to the front. So they front loaded with some space and time, but also even the layout of the days and days on and days off was interesting. So that's where I'll pass to Maggie just to give that little nugget.
Yeah, so they had reduced their rehearsal schedule to a 5-day week. And what they chose to do was, instead of having those 2 consecutive days off of Saturday, Sunday, they broke it up. And so I believe they had Thursday off and then Sunday off. And what it allowed them to do is, their particular creative team was a mixture of not only artists who would be gracing the stage, but some other artists who also acted as administrators and had many other responsibilities outside of rehearsal. So those 2 days off spread out like that allowed some of them to have a sort of like work day where they caught up on some stuff, as well as the Sunday, which they referred to as the laundry day. And it worked really well, and they did feel rested and sort of refreshed before they came back to working again. And it was just an interesting and playful idea of, nowhere is it set in stone that a 5-day work week has to be Monday to Friday. And creativity is a really huge element of the work that we're doing, and a huge element that's come in for every partner in terms of, let's just flip the table up and try something new when it comes to all of these challenges that we have. I would say though, Rachel, it didn't start with us. And one of the most important things that we've learned in the last almost 2 years is that a lot of this work has been done in some culturally marginalized companies, in the Indigenous community, where we're not, we're learning from them. And you spoke earlier about that move away from a kind of, the factory, but I'm going to use a term that I heard from Denise Balduke in January at a particular panel where she spoke, that she referred to the colonial clock. And that's been a very important lesson for us to learn and to try and sort of pass on to everyone, that this is not new with us. It's not new with Balancing Act. We want to move it further. We want to learn and move it further. But yeah, it didn't start with us. We just are recognizing that we have a lot to learn and a lot of ways in which we can improve.
Yeah, thank you for, that's really lovely. Many people would just be like, yeah, it started with me. But that's great. I mean, it's a learning process for all of us as we move forward, right? I think too, we look at many culturally traditional types of performance, and the way it's presented, it does lend itself, the way it's created and presents itself, the way it's created and presented lends itself to immediately sort of being more open and more honoring of caregivers and of people's of that work-life balance. So yes, so I think we might actually end up losing Chris, but I'm just gonna, she's having a lot of tech issues tonight, but let's just start with, like, how important is it to the overall arts ecosystem to support caregivers in the arts?
Oh, I mean, that's it just is. It's hard to answer the question, because I think that every one of us, I feel like every one of us at some point in time in our lives is going to be a caregiver of some kind. Whether you become a parent, whether you are a caregiver to a friend, a chosen family member, a partner, a parent, a colleague, it comes in so many different shapes and sizes that I think there's no reasoning for not having it included in our conversations with our communities, whether it is the artistic teams that come together or the administrative teams that work really hard to make it all happen. There's no world in which there are no caregivers in your community.
That's very true. I mean, often some people might say, oh, well, I don't have kids, because that's the first thought is parents as caregivers. But you're right, like, aging parents or my neighbor next door who I spend time looking after, like your chosen family. We don't know when we will become a caregiver, but like you said, it's likely most of us will at some point in our lives.
And I would actually add also, Rachel, that Susie, I'm thinking of one of our partners last year where they were working on a compassion fund. And I believe within that team, no one used any of those compassion fund. No one used any of that compassion fund support other than care sort of for themselves, and in order to bring their full self to the room. And in this particular case, I think of they were in rehearsal, kind of we were still in Omicron, and it was a very difficult time to be back in rehearsal. And there was a member of the creative team who was immunocompromised and who said, you know what, it's really stressful to take the TTC to rehearsal every day. And I would have a huge load off my shoulders if I could take a taxi to and from, and I would feel like I'm able to take care of myself better. So to me, that's a great example of how it's not just caregivers to like another person, but it's like caregivers to each other, and creating a community of care, an area of care, so that we can, as this artist said, like bring their full selves to work or to the rehearsal room, and just make it that little bit easier and supportive.
Yeah, that's great. Often I think we think of ourselves last, but if we're not cared for ourselves, it's hard for us to have anything to give forward to what we're working on or who we're working with. So that's a great point. It's really nice to hear that the project sort of is open to people saying that and saying these are my needs and I need to have my needs met in order to do my best. So yeah, thank you. So how does a company join Balancing Act? Like what's involved? It's a 3-year program so far, your level up. Is that separate? Is there an application process?
Yeah, we have our applications open right now for the 3rd year. And we are just inviting companies to offer an expression of interest. So tell us a little bit about who they are and what they've been doing. As Margaret said, many companies are already doing things. So it's about bringing that to the table, or about bringing an idea to the table. A lot of our companies, the word's spreading. So some companies have come forward saying, oh yeah, we'd like to try out a compassion fund, or we'd like to try the 5-day work week. And we're just really interested in all sizes and scope of company, all disciplines. We really enjoyed working with Femme de Feu, and I think that leaning into rural and remote communities would be really amazing. Margaret and I were just talking today, we were just thinking like, what would we learn? What are the unique, challenges? Because it is so different. And I know with working with Holly and Femme de Feu, we did learn a lot about, how she can articulate childcare support at the Arts Center within Welland, how she can bring people in, how articulating childcare support is also helping to bring people into the community. So all those nuances are really interesting to us. So we're open for, we can be reached out to for one-on-one. We also have an info session about Level Up tomorrow, which we can post in the chat. And yeah, just really open always to anything folks have to bring to the table. And as well, you know, Level Up is a container to work with partner companies, but there's more to come. So we're really just interested in all of the conversations and seeing what might happen.
Wonderful. Yeah, it would be really interesting, I think, to try and connect you with some of our rural companies, just to see, because I mean, like every city is different, every rural area is different, and depending on how far away from things you are, whether you're rural or remote, that would
Mhm.
definitely impact as well. So what advice, though, would you give to artists or administrators who are working towards creating a more supportive system or more supportive systems in their company?
Mm.
Susie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll start and I'll pass over. I mean, we're trying to work on the same things that we are learning alongside our partners. So just to say that, one thing that we've been working on at Balancing Act is slowing down and trying to um, do less to do more. And so we also invite the companies that we work with to go slowly and to look at bite-sized projects or approaches. And maybe that's where I'll pass to Margaret, because we were just speaking about this today.
Yeah, I mean, the most bite-sized thing, to be honest, is just having the conversation and not having it be something that someone feels they have to sort of keep hidden or secret. Um, I think both Susie and I, in our personal lives as artists, have been in positions when we were new parents where we felt like we couldn't be completely honest about the juggle that we were doing in order to do our work. And so, this sort of baseline, I don't want to set the bar low. The bar should be high, but the baseline, I guess, is like have a conversation and just ask and create an environment where no one feels that they have to hide that element of their lives. They don't have to hide the invisible production that they're doing behind the scenes every day. Um, and bite size is important because it's slow work, and it requires patience, and there's nothing wrong with like going step by step by step and scaling up once you know kind of like what works, especially for your company or your collective, um, individually. Like each case and each partner's work is unique. They might draw from the same elements, but it has to be something that works for you, that works for the people that are on your creative team, that works for the people on your admin team. um, Otherwise, it's like fitting a square peg in a round hole, and it's not, it might do more harm than good. So there's no harm in taking it easy, taking it slowly, and as a starting off point, having conversations and learning about like, does someone have this other juggle behind the scenes that you actually didn't know anything about? And maybe you could switch just one thing about how you're working that would open up a whole door of ease for them that you would never have thought of if you didn't know about it in the first place. That's kind of where I would start, I think.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, I think we've really seen, I mean, definitely I've seen, even just in my own personal work life. You know, I started working in the arts in my early 20s. That was the late 90s. So there's definitely been a shift in thinking. And when I first started, like you wouldn't say anything. You were worried about being able to keep your job. I knew people who were hiding pregnancies or sick family members because they thought, gotta hustle while I can, right? Like that was the motto that everybody used, like hustle while you can. And it was like, oof, everything was quick, 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 quick. You're just going, going, going. And so I think it's really nice to see this opportunity to slow down in the arts and to support each other, in order to create something very beautiful, right? Like we're not sacrificing the work that's being created. We're just shifting how we look at coming towards it, which is great. And I think it's really great to advocate to those companies like, hey, just have a conversation. Because you're right, it's something we often forget. We think, oh, I've got to run into all these policies or get this organized or that, when really we need to know from our company or our staff and our friends and our colleagues what everybody needs. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that we're discovering a lot about that post-pandemic in terms of um, we got to have a little snippet into what everyone's juggle was behind the Zoom camera, right? Um, and so the door is open a little bit still to sort of bring those conversations in. And then after that, I'm thinking actually, Susie, of a conversation we had with someone in the community earlier on this week where they've been doing the work, but then now one thing that might make it easier for them is to sort of begin a process for them, because they now know, oh, this is the type of work that we're being asked to support, and maybe this is how we can continue this support. Like there are building blocks to it, which do take learning and time.
Right. So we're just going to go back a little to grounding us in our rural and remote friends and folks and members. And often in our rural and remote areas, we see full-time artists and professional companies. And we also see those that I like to call passion artists. I don't like the word amateur, just because someone doesn't make a living at their art every day of the week doesn't mean that they aren't passionate about it and approach it in a professional manner. So, these passion artists might be working on a farm or working in a mine and for 2 weeks, and they come home for 2 weeks, and that's the time they have to practice their art, right? And it's often so that they can make ends meet. So it can sometimes be hard, but not impossible, to make your living in the arts in rural communities. Do you see a future where Balancing Act makes its way sort of fully into rural and remote areas? And do you think that might look different than it looks in urban areas?
Yeah, I'm really curious about this demographic of artist, that is working, say, the full-time day job, or or these, as you say, like 2 weeks on and then coming home to do their arts work. I guess why I'm curious is because I just feel that the life work, when we're talking about life work balance, say in the city like Toronto here, with, theater seasons and like this thing, I can just imagine how different what work-life balance means in the rural and remote context. But we want to learn more, is what I'm saying. And I'm super curious because I think there's probably a lot Balancing Act can learn from that lifestyle choice, and also that choice, or maybe it's not a choice. Maybe that's just the way it is to keep going, and so how art folds into that, not only professional work, but their domestic life. And yeah, I feel that there's definitely a route for Balancing Act to go into those communities, but I think it's that we really need to learn a lot. I just keep saying that over and over again, but because it is really new territory, quite literally, for us.
Yeah, Susie and I were talking about it earlier on today, because my first thought was along the ideas of just sort of, what is outside your door when you walk outside. So that anecdote I told earlier about someone being concerned about taking the TTC doesn't apply to necessarily the rural artists during Omicron, but how would it apply? Is it, my first thought was the weather, which I hope that's not naive of me, but my first thought was the weather. And like, if you have to drive a long distance to take care of someone, if you have to drive a long distance to pick up someone, if you are incapacitated in some way, and also certain like services or things that that are perhaps more in closer proximity to us in a city than they might be in a rural area, that we just take for granted because that's what we have around us. So that's part of the learning that Susie and I and our team have to do in terms of what might apply to more rural companies and artists. But I would also say at the same time that what is similar across the board for everyone is that it depends on the individual company and the individual artist. Like it's always going to be different because it always has to depend on like what works for you. I use the term one size fits one in terms of like what works for like theater direct and balancing act doesn't work for, you know, the next theater company next door because of the people or the type of caregiving that's involved or the type of work that they do. And it's really important. I know I've said it, you know, a few times, but it's so important that we know it's a case by case basis. And even for sometimes it's like a project by project basis, season by season. You really, you know, as we know, things in the arts change quite consistently. We can somehow always count on that. So you have to be nimble and also respond to your own needs, tailor things to your needs.
Yeah, I will tell you, you did hit on a few good things there. Weather is huge. If it's like a snowstorm,
Yeah.
depending on where you are and how you live, like if you're really far north, like a little bit of snow, no big deal. But, you know,
Mhm.
depending on the weather or, you know, if you're getting an ice storm, like it's different everywhere. I was working up in Thunder Bay last week and I was like, oh, we're supposed to get 10 centimeters of snow the day I'm leaving. Do you think my plane will still take off? And they kind of giggled at me and said, snow's fine. It's the rain that's a problem. And I was like, oh, okay. Like I never would have thought of that being from southeastern Ontario, right? So you're absolutely right. It again, case by case, even just in how rural looks, right? And what companies would be thinking or people would be thinking. Okay, so I've just got a few questions left, if that's okay. And we've got folks watching, but I don't have any questions yet, but please feel free if you have questions, put them in the chat on Facebook and I will ask them. But my next question is, so you really provide support for all different, or program is for all different types of caregivers, from parents to folks who are siblings or care for siblings, to folks who take care of their parents, their aging parents. When Balancing Act started, was this always the goal?
I mean, my understanding is that it came out of originally a group of parents, you know, and particularly those with young children. So those that, you know, couldn't find their way to the theater at night, you know, or couldn't manage the, you know, the six day a week schedules. But I think it's very quickly expanded. And, you know, a lot of us are also in that sandwich generation. So we're not only caring for our young ones, but caring for our aging parents. I was just thinking when you said weather, my parents, I
Yeah,
grew up
your
rural,
parents.
and my parents are in their 80s, and in the spring it floods and they row across their creek to get to the road, to the top of the driveway. So anyway, that's just me, but like feeling the sandwich. Yeah, and you know, our steering committee has been really huge in terms of bringing all these different perspectives of care to the table. So definitely we've expanded how we understand caring responsibilities, and yeah, I mean, and earlier we were speaking about community care, and just this idea that, you know, or this question, I guess, is caregiving a singular act? So, you know, is parenting an individual act, or where does the community or the village come into play, and how those kinds of questions around community care relate to the way that, you know, we're decolonizing our spaces and intergenerational support. And there's a lot of talk about the care economy, and you know, the arts aren't immune to that. And so I think the conversation is heading into this, yeah, this place of really how are we looking out for each other?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, often in the arts, we consider our castmates or our project mates like family for that time period, right? So it does
Mhm.
make sense that we begin to, like you said, look out for each other and care for each other. So we've sort of, you know, we've talked about the sort of the past for Balancing Act in your beginning. So I want to sort of think towards the future. So do you see a future where the ideas that Balancing Act are bringing forward and advocating for are almost like de rigueur across Canada, like they're just par for the course?
Yes. Yes. I mean, it's starting. It's really amazing to hear about the work that companies are doing, whether they're affiliated with Balancing Act or not. Like, quite often we're meeting companies who are saying, oh, actually, we've been doing this and this and this for years. And that's amazing. And so our goal has been to sort of like spread the word, and make sure that we're celebrating all of these companies that are doing this work. But I think there are also more artists and arts workers asking for it and asking for the conversations to be had. And I personally when I think back to how I was too terrified to say anything or ask for anything, I'm so thrilled when I hear that the ecosystem is changing enough that some of that fear can be eliminated for a new parent, or someone who's thinking of becoming a parent, or someone who has caregiving needs or specific care needs for themselves, where they can feel empowered and like they have the agency to sort of bring it up in conversation. That so in my mind, yes, definitely de rigueur, and forever changing and teaching us new things. But yeah, I don't know, Susie, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think also it's in step. It's inextricably linked to social justice work and the EDIA processes that theater companies, performing arts companies are taking on. And so yeah, so we're working hard to better articulate and understand caregiving as a part of that work. And so hopefully, yeah, it continues to uplift everyone, and keep folks in the room or bring more folks into the fold, onto the stage.
Amazing. I do feel it gives opportunity to folks who may have felt unwelcome or unsafe in art spaces before. Particularly I'm thinking of disabled artists, even being able to come in and advocate more freely for themselves as well. By creating a culture of care, we really are honoring every voice at the table rather than excluding. So thank you for the work that you're doing. It's very much appreciated. And before we wrap this up, can you each share with us one story that sums up why you do what you do, or why your work is important to you personally?
Oh, well, I'm just going to go for Susie. I'm going to say, well, again, like I said just now, when I hear of artists or people, arts workers who are asking for support, it I'm so envious of their guts, in a way, but I'm also so thrilled that the needle is moving on the conversation enough that it doesn't take as much guts as it might have, when I was younger. And I think there's so many. I don't know how to choose one, but it's the stories for me where companies or collectives have been creative. If they don't necessarily have money to put towards support, they've been creative in like maneuvering things or using their space, or in a way that enabled support to happen, even though they might have felt um, financially incapable of doing it. And it's that creativity that gets me really excited about how accessible this work can be. That was a kind of non-answer answer. Sorry. I'll pass it to Susie. She'll have a good one.
Oh, they're all good. It's really hard to choose. I mean, I do reflect on my own journey and how I felt I had to, in the early years, hide my mothering away in order to stay available for professional work. And so the story that I was telling Margaret today was that I was in a rehearsal room with an artist, and the artist is a parent. But what I didn't know is that they were also caring for a mother-in-law, and it was a tough day. And when they finally said, "Oh, I'm also caring, for my mother-in-law," I just kind of paused the rehearsal and was able to tell them about balancing act and, let them know that we offer these affinity groups. Some of them are specifically for caring for aging adults and parents. And yeah, and the reaction and the response of just, yeah, I could just see it on their face that it was like, oh my goodness, something like this exists. And reflecting on my own past and thinking, wow, what would have been different if if I'd been in rooms where someone had said something like that, or like, yeah. And so yeah, it does keep us going. And also, there's lots of stories as well where we learn that folks have been doing things for a really long time, as we were saying right at the top, and learning from the past and from other individuals and groups that are just really making their spaces inclusive and have been for some time. I think that also just keeps us going.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here today and spending this time. I think that the work that you are doing, and as you say, learning about, is really helping us to refocus and reshape the landscape of the arts in Canada. And I truly feel we're sort of able to look to other countries and borrow from them and share with them as well as we make these changes to create I always say, like, a kinder, gentler performing arts, right? In a way. Um, and while I'm chatting, I want to, on behalf of Jason and I, give a shout out to SPARC, because our hours are always flexible and we make our own schedules, and we get a lot of support from our board. So they definitely live and breathe and embrace where you're coming from as well. So thank you, Spark Board. Yeah, thank you so much. We'd love to keep in contact, and if you have updates for our newsletter, because I'm sure everyone's going to want to know how things are going moving forward.
Mhm.
So again, thank you so much for being here with us this week. Thanks to everyone who's watching live, or if you're watching after the fact on YouTube. We're so happy that you've been here with us. Please join us next month on May the 31st, when we are joined by Arwen Carpenter and Carol Anderson, who will share their experience of beginning a dance festival in rural Ontario with us. That's the Flight Festival in Prince Edward County. And if you were at Symposium in October, you would have had mindful movement with both Carol and Anderson and Arwen in the mornings before we started our long days. So we hope to see you in May. Thanks again, Margaret. Thanks again, Susie. It's been wonderful. I'm going to stop our Facebook Live now. And now I'm going to